Hello, thank you for being here in the panel Emerging Global Security Issue, Money Laundering in Ukraine's Financial Sector Hindering Development. We're going to listen to Anna Stallings, a doctoral student of global security at the American Public University. I now pass the floor to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you for dialing in to watch this presentation. I would like to begin by saying that the ideas here are my own and not of any institutions associated with my name. I am a second-year doctoral student in global security at American Public University System. This presentation focuses on how financial crimes and more specifically money laundering impact the development of economies as an emerging global security issue. And as Anna said, this presentation is specifically on Ukraine. The agenda, as far as the agenda goes, I will explain the conceptual framework. Next, I will go over the threats, vulnerability, and institutional capabilities, followed by findings. Since I present this from a global security perspective, the focus here is around human security, and the conceptual framework evolves around development. I say that because this presentation, in part, stems from insights I gained while analyzing the 1994 Human Development Report and the subsequent reports, which laid out the human security paradigm and the 7 dimensions laid out in that paradigm. That report informed my understanding of how money laundering has evolved over the years with a direct impact on economic development. Interestingly, in the 1994 HDR, money laundering was mentioned in the context of drug trafficking. Today, money laundering is linked to many more internationally recognized predicate offenses. At that time, the OECD estimated that around $85 billion in drug proceeds were laundered through financial markets each year, while today, that number is anywhere from 800 billion to 2 trillion globally. The human securitization of the financial sector. One consequence of globalization is the liberalization of monetary policies across the globe, allowing previously isolated nations access to financial capital for economic growth and development. This was the first introduction to Western-style institutions for some countries, such as Ukraine. Ukrainian leaders and civil society faced the extraordinary task of developing market economy institutions and creating supporting governance mechanisms and compliance tools. In the financial sector, despite the Ukrainian government passing and adapting economic laws in the last few decades and joining international regimes to help curb financial crimes, the National Risk Assessment Report on Ukraine determined that the degree of corruption and illicit financial flows still impact the development of Ukrainian economy. The effectiveness assessment differs fundamentally from the assessment of technical compliance, as it seeks to assess the adequacy of the implementation of the FATF recommendations and identifies the extent to which a country achieves a defined set of outcomes that are central to robust AML system. And even though, as you see on a slide, AML regime introduces potential solutions, new laws, these regimes are subject to threats and vulnerabilities. Thereby, it is crucial to assess these institutions and capabilities. The money laundering cycle, it's just an overview. It typically has 3 stages: placement, layering, and integration. But in reality, laundering cases may have all 3 stages. Some stages could be combined, and several stages could repeat themselves. For instance, cash from drug sales is divided into small amounts, and then it is deposited by money mules and afterwards transferred as payment for services to shell companies. Due to the clandestine nature of laundering, it is, however, difficult to estimate the total amount that goes through the cycle. Now, looking at this slide, the question is, why global security implications? Because money laundering can impact nations where financial crimes and money laundering thrive. The rest of the country and the population is affected by reduced private and foreign investment often connected to corrupt officials and bribes, which can lead the economy into decline. For example, by reducing resources into businesses that do not make any profits, because often launderers are worried about hiding the sources of the funds and the illicit proceeds, rather than investing in companies that can create local wealth, boost government tax returns, allowing more money for national economic development. Money laundering is one tool of transnational criminal organizations exploiting jurisdictional vulnerabilities to launder. It is a global security challenge. Now, one of the factors assessed during the risk assessment was corruption. Ukraine scores 33 out of 100, and 100 would be very clean. As compared to other countries in the region, Poland scores 55 and Romania 46 out of 100. Notably, though, since 2013, Ukraine has moved up a few points, but it scores at the same level as Zambia, the Philippines, and El Salvador. Now, there's a critique in academic literature contesting the view that governance reform alone will overcome corruption, and that there's as much attention on grant corruption while petty corruption is not being addressed, so the cultural sources remain. This cannot be dismissed as even more significant when billions of dollars of international aid are going to Ukraine. Part of that will be the reconstruction and recovery efforts. This is a more urgent issue as Ukraine's consultations with the EU about potential path forward and EU membership are ongoing. As recently as 2021, the European Court of Auditors report found that grant corruption and state capture impede growth and directly harm the democratic process. Ukraine's many public governance reforms underway since the 2014 revolution dignity have been interrupted, though, by Russia's large-scale aggression. Humanitarian devastation and the destruction of the economy are the direct consequences of Russia's aggression. However, when reconstruction and recovery efforts are underway, Ukraine will also have the opportunity to update its systems of governance based on international AML standards and good practices. Threats to AML. Before proceeding, let's note the definition for threats in the context of AML regime is defined as a person or group, object, or activity with potential to cause harm to state, society, or economy. Ukraine is heavily influenced by state capture, going back decades. State capture is a deep-rooted issue when narrow interest groups take control of the institutions and processes to make public policy, buying influence, not just to disregard the rules, but also to rewrite the rules to help them. In the early 1990s, few oligarchs were able to gain large parts of the economy during the privatization process from socialism to capitalism, but now it has evolved into a strategy by those benefiting to expand and keep their own power. Public institutions became a means for self-interest and rent-seeking, rather than financing broader interest and economic development of everyday Ukrainians. The political stability indicators in Ukraine have barely reached 50%. The political stability marker includes crucial governance aspects such as state legitimacy. For example, if you look on the bottom left graphics, it shows you that the majority of Ukrainians do not trust institutions such as banks. The graphic on the top shows shadow economies make it more challenging. For comparison, the EU average shadow economy is 19%, while Ukraine's is around 40% of the GDP. Deshadowing is hindered by things such as significant investment risks. War fighting in Ukraine is also a significant threat, as war allows criminal organizations to destabilize the institutions responsible for monitoring and enforcing the law. For example, sporadic churning of electric power grid interrupts the daily operations of the enforcement mechanisms. The environment has been unstable since 2014 for sure, but since the February 22 war, security has deteriorated as it relates to terrorism, War also affects training of the AML staff, inadequate governing and legislative framework of the monitoring system, lacking the National Bank's intelligence unit actions, and non-detection of suspicious financial transactions. Based on the computations of these indexes, linked with economic data reveal a harmful impact on economic development, showing negative trends. Local, petty, and at the state level, grant corruption contributes to this trend. Domestic studies have showed that even higher rates, as about 65% of respondents in domestic surveys acknowledge encountering corruption in conducting regular business. Vulnerabilities, again, the definition is in this context is vulnerabilities are things that can be exploited by the threats, as I just mentioned previously. So thereby, early identification of the vulnerabilities to threats helps to inform the stakeholders and make early decisions. Ukraine's law and domestic policy supply inefficient measures and detection of laundering, such as incomplete regulation and legislation. Internal vulnerabilities, such as non-compliance with AML laws because of inadequate training and professional development of the staff involved in the duties, including in the commercial sector, and not understanding the typology of the economic crimes committed, missing suspicious actions, or the growing levels of shadow financial system, and the limited identification of attribute contributes to ever-increasing size of shadow and offshore financial system. And this vulnerability adversely affects the AML compliance. Ukraine's security situation presents a vulnerability that transnational criminal and terrorist organizations can exploit. In eastern Ukraine, separatist movements have created instability for the rest of the country. Literature shows smuggling and trafficking, proliferation, and drug trafficking are on increase. The graphic on the left shows how Ukraine has progressed, though, in an implementation of the international AML standards, showing clearly that it has progressed quite significantly over the last 2 decades or so. And the graphic on the right shows what conversion centers, what are the money laundering schemes still that Ukraine is dealing with, enabled by state capture. And in this case, a money laundering scheme of tax evasion through fictitious transactions for the purchase of scrap metal and converting non-cash funds into cash. So as an example, Enterprise A and Enterprise B opened accounts in one banking institutions. They were credited with funds for scrap metal from a group of enterprises, which previously received funds from real businesses. Both were recently created. The funds are quickly removed to buy scrap metal. And what that means is the enterprises of the real sector of the economy reduced their own tax burden on VAT and income tax, and respectively, the budget didn't receive the revenue. Institutional capabilities. Multiple agencies are involved in enforcing the AML regime in Ukraine. Ukraine's Financial Intelligence Unit, the FIU, in the center is the leading organization responsible for the state's financial monitoring service. It was created in 2002 when the first AML laws were passed. The FIU gathers and organizes information on money laundering cases. It confirms the data and forms generalized documents based on the data. One of the most critical tasks of the FIU is to account for suspicious financial transactions and send proposals based on the findings to higher authorities to help develop national policies countering these typologies and execute AML guidelines. From the human security perspective, the FIU's job is to ensure the financial integrity and security of Ukraine's monetary system to detect crimes such as money laundering, which impact the economy. The FIU leads the committee and includes representatives from all organizations participating in writing legislation to adapt global standards and fight against money laundering. In addition, the FIU prepares strategies to counter illicit finance. In 2016, Ukraine set up multiple agencies, as you see on the left side. Some of those agencies were set up specifically to investigate and prosecute financial crimes with nexus to corruption. As part of the reform, An independent specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office was set up. Its prominent role was the management of pretrial investigations performed by the Anti-Corruption Bureau. The Independent Defense Anti-Corruption Committee was created to fight corruption in the Defense Department. NACO aims to fight crime, including scrutinizing military supply chains and illegal trade with areas currently occupied by Russia. Just as an example, this organization also has a function of public integrity, checking up on public officials to discourage illegal activities and potential diversion of public funds. As far as international engagement, the State Fiscal Service of Ukraine is charged with tax and customs policies, and only since 2015, an internal unit has been set up for investigating laundering. The National Bank of Ukraine is an institution responsible for guaranteeing the internal and external stability of domestic currency. In that role, the bank has the decisive role in licensing and management functions in the banking sector. As of 2017, 182 banking institutions were listed with the state, 95 having a permit. And also internationally, as far as cooperation goes, Ukraine is part of the Moneyval, experts of the Council of Europe on the evaluation of money laundering, the Egmont Group, the Interpol, Europol, as examples. Findings. Ukraine has undergone a few external and internal evaluations of the national AML regime since 2014. That is a commendable step for Ukraine, particularly now that it has applied to become an EU member. Incorporating the remaining suggestions of the evaluations would decrease the overall risk of money laundering, increasing the efficacy of the AML regime. Now, at the time of the 2013, for example, Moneyval Mutual Assessment Report by the European Commission, the terrorist index, as an example, was insignificant, but the assessment happened before the conflict erupted. Since 2014, and really since 22, once again, the region has developed into transit area for terrorists. Suppose terrorism takes root in eastern Ukraine and becomes a base area of operations, the long-term impact on the region would be devastating to the reconstruction and redevelopment of the country. Acknowledging the improved legislation to create new institutions and passing the AML laws to support the work of these institutions, the system efficiency is still lacking. Closer analysis shows that Ukraine is still a centralized country. At the subnational level, local and regional governments are not fully self-governing entities. Their councils have very few powers. Administrative statistics and reporting across all organizations, including law enforcement and judicial authorities, to guarantee the holistic output of the AML mechanisms across the government is still unavailable. Still, until the measures are incorporated and functioning as designed, it will be challenging to develop more prompt strategies to counter the latest typologies. In addition, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, which publishes the Basel Index, found that for 2022, Ukraine ranks 65th among the 128 countries evaluated. The index brings up political and lawful consequences, corruption, and bribery, which are highly challenging. At the same time, indicating money laundering offenses or enforcing the AML measures was the weakest aspect. Other countries in the area have improved their standing because there's cultural affiliation. Regional collaboration would be beneficial. The expansion of AML regime in Ukraine is not a fluke. Still, the system has developed out of necessity because of the evolving threat of laundering reaching international boundaries. No country is able to deal with this alone and to counter it alone. Ukraine's AML infrastructure is susceptible to historical ways from when Ukraine was a socialist country in which those in power did not have accountability. As we know now, one of the factors that led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union was lack of accountability, as the economic debt became unsustainable. Threat assessment of the AML shows that internal aspects such as untrained AML professionals and external threats such as corruption impact the economy. Ukraine's government has acknowledged that the country's development has been affected by laundered funds, directly limiting the tax revenue base to reform the system and attract foreign investment. As the reconstruction begins, the Western world will support the government of Ukraine by providing funds. However, based on the example of the EU's provisions and conditions on aid, international organizations will likely also impose accountability. Other findings show that the volatile security situation environment continues to worsen. Discrepancies in policies, threats, and vulnerabilities have direct implications for human security. An appraisal of policy shows Ukraine has taken steps to deal with money laundering. Still, much work remains to make the regime effective at detecting early in the process to prevent the illicit flows from impacting the economy. Undeniably, the agencies across the government will have to communicate more effectively to counter the direct impact of laundering, including seizing the illicit proceeds. Ensuring transparency and integrity of the reconstruction plan, both its development and implementation, is also an urgent policy priority for Ukraine. International experience provides multiple examples of failed reconstructions. Resetting public governance foundations in Ukraine should address high-level corruption control and policy making and economy to ensure rule of law, to boost economic development by unleashing private sector competition. If burning compliance characteristics, for example, on the commercial institutions would have an exceptionally negative impact on the economy surface, indicating some aspects of the policy, for example, are unsustainable and too burdensome, that also needs to be addressed. Providing a venue for officials working in this space to give feedback on the mechanisms that are already in place will also provide an opportunity for potential improvement. Given the threats and vulnerabilities, a persistent balanced approach will address challenges the Ukrainian AML regime confronts. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Stallings. It was a really interesting presentation. If there are no comments, we can continue the conversation on HOVA with your peers, and yeah, but thank you very, very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Bye.